do have crazes and themes in life, the Rubik's Cube, or flared trousers, drain. But I don't think weight loss is something which is that I don't think the drugs for weight loss are going to go away. So I think that will be a fantastic market for as far as the eye can see. The next thing to say is that there is. I always quote the example of which any family with kids that have embarked on a long car journey know, which is that you tell your young kids that this is going to be a 6-hour road trip, and at the end of the driveway, as you back out, they say, "Are we there yet?" And there's always a kind of the stock market has got this real "Are we there yet?" mentality, and in the case of weight loss, I mean the legal the two legal drugs for it, so Zepbound and Wegovy, have only been launched in a handful of markets. The Eli Lilly compound, tirzepatide, is now called Zepbound, as it was only approved for weight loss in the US at the end of last year. So I mean, we really are. I mean, I hate the use of the word innings, but we really are in the very early innings of all this. The second thing to say is that we hear a lot and we read a lot about competition. It's like, really, there's only going to be 2 players in a market this big, so there's undoubtedly going to be competition. But then the third thing is that at the moment, these drugs are extremely expensive. So a month's supply of the medium dose of Zepbound is $1,260, and I'll leave you to guess how I know that. So obviously that is if you can't get it on insurance in the US, which is where I live, that's too expensive. But these things will get cheaper over time. And then the concept, and then the other thing, of course, is that once you stop taking them, most people tend to put back on a lot of or all of the weight they've lost. So over the next few years, if you're talking of themes and you rightly call the theme weight loss, what you're going to hear a lot more about over the next few years and probably decades from Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly and other companies is the concept of weight management. So at the moment, these drugs are injectable once a week. There are obviously a lot of drugs that we take daily, statins, or people take aspirin, and I think we will get an over-the-counter version in oral form of at least these 2, semaglutide and tirzepatide, which people will take on a somewhat regular basis to ensure that they keep their weight off. So we are. I mean, it really is a case of come back to us in 10 years and see whether these things have even been launched in some other countries. So it's very, very early days.
I mean, I don't think they've actually been launched yet in what is statistically the most obese country in the world.
But do you think that
you've got to ask us what that is?
Yeah, you're supposed to say, what country's that, Terry? Mexico.
Yeah. Do you think, obviously, that investors are excited about the potential here for these companies to make good money, and it sounds like you think that there is a big opportunity here. But I guess is there a risk that it's a little bit like the initial bubble? Everyone's excited, and perhaps expectations are too high, and then we might get a period of disappointment later this year or in a year's time. Or does that not bother you? Because if you like a sector or you like the opportunities, you just look through 10 years down the line, not simply what might happen in 6-12 months.
Well, I think you're right about that. If we think we know what's going to go on in the long term, and we don't often think that, frankly, but sometimes we think we do, then we try and live through the bumps in the road, because otherwise you never know when the bump in the road produces great that we weren't in it when they had that poor quarter. But then do you get back in? I mean, a company that we own that's very, very much of that sort is IDEX, the veterinary diagnostic equipment company, which is very highly rated. And we've continued to own it, even though we're aware that those sort of things can happen from time to time, and will happen, I'm sure, and be painful when they do happen, because we just don't think that there's another opportunity like it out there, or that we would ever get back into it. And I mean, I think that the long-term outlook here is profoundly good. I mean, it's worth mentioning that I've owned Novo Nordisk long before the words weight loss were ever mentioned in connection with it. What attracted to us to the company was its, I think, very unusual approach to drug discovery, and to other aspects of the way that its business is run. We've got a bit of a soft spot for companies which have got family or foundations with controlling shareholdings, who take a very long-term view, and they've got exactly that, basically. And I think it does enable them to do things in terms of drug discovery and its approach, which others, without that protection and with the market to satisfy, might not do, basically.
I mean, also, 2021 is obviously pretty close in the rearview mirror, in terms of a time when a lot of things like buy now and pay later or things like that got completely overhyped. But there is a pretty simple difference between things like that and Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, which is Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly are actually making real money and real profits out of this. And you know, Terry quoted Meta being on a P of 26 times earlier. Novo Nordisk is on a P of 35, which incidentally is a lot cheaper than Eli Lilly, but Novo Nordisk is on a P of 35. You know, that suggests that we need some kind of line of sight to earnings doubling over the next 3 to 5 years. Can we see that happening? I think absolutely we can. So
it's not only that we're talking about weight loss for this area, and bear in mind it is actually a molecule that was devised for diabetes. Right? The first thing, so it does that, but also, of course, they've now got labeling for cardiovascular in the case of Novo Nordisk. They've halted a trial on basically arresting problems with kidney function early because it was so successful. It undoubtedly has an improving effect upon liver function. They've also got the phase 3 results now, which are positive for autoimmune conditions, arthritis, lupus, etc. And yeah, we probably have ahead of us arresting development of Alzheimer's, and so it goes on. I mean, the chief executive of another medical company that we invested described it to us as the elixir of life. I mean, this is an extraordinary development, I think, for human beings, and I suspect that we are, rather like some other things, we're all going to end up taking it, basically, for its many benefits, not necessarily in the doses that it's currently being administered or in the manner that it's currently being administered.
I mean, you're obviously interested in sort of the broader pharmaceutical space. Is this not sort of slightly a high risk industry in a way that, you know, there's a lot of unpredictability? It's quite hard unless unless you're an expert science to properly understand what's going on. Is this? I was quite surprised. I think I wouldn't. Fundsmith is known perhaps more for sort of consumer brands, easier to understand businesses. Why would you want to take the risk of delving into sort of sciencey stuff?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things to say about that. One of them is one of our team, I think, is actually quite good at understanding this. So I think that's the one thing. Secondly, we agree with you, though, that this is a chancy sort of area. And we think that the chanciness, as it were, falls into two kind of camps. One is biotechnology companies, one product, biotechnology companies, which are pre-revenue, to use that polite term, and where one needs to bear in mind that the likelihood of any single compound making it from inception through to commercial production is 1 in 10,000, right? Before you go betting on any of those. So you can forget us doing any of that kind of. Then you've got the giants of the pharmaceutical industry, which cover a number of therapeutic areas and who seemingly basically got into a drug discovery process in many cases that amounts to trying to do something which is another iteration of an existing compound in order to get a new patent for something, and as a result of which it's not very efficacious quite often, and the placebo does quite well in the final trial compared to it, and so you get things like these massive research facilities with 2,000 or 3,000 biochemist PhDs sitting in there. And the statistic I like on that one, 1 in 10,000 for the biotech companies. Here's the statistic for the big companies with their big factories producing these things, is that the average biochemist PhD who goes into a career in drug research, if you round to the nearest whole number by the normal convention of rounding in a number, over his entire career will work on exactly 0 drugs that make it. Right? And it's dysfunctional at both ends. We think we don't own any other drug companies. We just thought Novo is very unusual. And I think it's born of a number of things. I mentioned the family foundation there. I think that's one. The other one is because one of the things that people often say about Wegovy and Mounjaro for that matter is, this is a terrible thing because people have to take it for the rest of their lives. Well, maybe or maybe not, but it is being made by a company whose foundation is in drugs that you take for the remainder of your life. Yeah? And so I think it's very unusual. I'm not saying we'll never find another company like it, but none spring to mind.
I think one of the ways in which Novo suggests that it's right to avoid most of the rest of the pharmaceutical sector is that, like all great inventions in life, this drug was in a sense discovered by accident, which probably tells you something about the
drug discovery process.
Which probably makes people who are actually doing this for a living feel quite bad. The other thing to say is that back in the day, the big pharmaceutical companies had these very large R&D departments that were focused on discovering new drugs. Nowadays, the industry is basically bifurcated between the biotech companies who are sort of putting in all the hard work at the start to try and discover new compounds, and the big drug companies who are really, even though they still spend a lot of money on R&D, they're really just into commercialization and development of these drugs. They're not really into, then the days when the names that we all know and love, Glaxo and SmithKline and AstraZeneca, would come out with something that's really, really novel, are probably in the rearview mirror. It's unlikely, just because that's not really their aim anymore. Their aim is to be the big machine that buys these things, de-risked from the biotech sector. And the problem is because the big drug companies are de-risked, they're not particularly attractive anymore. Look at Pfizer's share price for detail. Conversely, the biotech sector, as Terry just explained, is just completely hit and miss. And by the way, when you were saying that it seems very hard for somebody at Fundsmith or to look at a pharmaceutical company and work out which drug's going to work and which doesn't, believe me, Terry and me over a combined whatever it is now, 80 years or something in industry, have worked with all the great and the good of the sell side and buy side pharmaceutical analysts. And I don't think we've ever met any of them who are any better or worse than anybody else. It's just a complete dark.
I'll give you a take on that. I don't like talking about competitors, it's unprofessional, but there is a fund which shall remain nameless out there, right? Which is a pharmaceutical fund, right? And which has got 6 analysts and had 50 companies in the portfolio. Guess which company it didn't know?
Novo Nordisk.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing about not understanding things is, I agree with you. I mean, our main take on Mads, who was the chief scientific officer of Novo Nordisk when we first met him some years back, and he was describing things like this to us, was about the only thing that we could agree on understanding about it was that the bloke was very, very clever and had a brain the size of a planet. But there's a lot of things that you do invest in that you don't understand. So, I mean, before we get away from that, I mean, your kitchen cleaner or your bathroom cleaner is a surfactant. How many people who either invest in them or recommend investing in them from the sell side do you think can explain the chemical process of a surfactant to you?
Yeah, probably not a lot. So
I wouldn't have thought so. No,
yeah.
I don't think so.
Oh, well, if I could steer the conversation to Diageo. Now, we've had 2 consecutive updates from that company that have weighed on the share price. Just want to get your thoughts. Do you think this is still a great business, or actually are we now sort of discovering weaknesses both from consumer demand and perhaps more worrying from management oversight, which might prompt you to sort of reassess that stock in your portfolio?
I think the answer is we're not sure. Let's just look at what's actually happened. You're right, they've had a couple of earnings reports which weren't as expected. there definitely is something wrong. Is there something wrong? We don't need to debate that. Yes, there's definitely been a problem here, which is to say, sales fell sharply in LATAM, and they didn't have good enough data about where the booze was between being in their distributors, being in retail outlets and bars, or being in the consumers. And so they were, so the pipeline was far more stock than they realised, and bang, the combination of a sharp fall in demand plus that has caused a problem. And that's unsatisfactory. Now, in many respects, it's the kind of thing that sometimes happens in companies which we call a glitch, and we look for that as a buying opportunity because they'll overcome it and so on. But does it speak to a sort of wider problem? And I think the answer is we don't know, but we're concerned about that, because the fact that it was there already is not good, and the reaction that we've seen to it so far is not great. And we have got a new and relatively untested management sitting there in this circumstance. So that's all a combination of poor things. Look, there are other things that are going on that they can't help, and it doesn't particularly affect them. Obviously, no pun particularly intended in this, there's a hangover from the growth in consumption during COVID. People couldn't go to the pub, but they stayed at home and made Herculean efforts to compensate, it seems. Julian's nodding because he's... and so, and we're like a lot of things that were very good during that had good pandemics. They're coming off that, so don't worry about that. But no, that is actually quite a concern. You've not touched upon something else in here, which is one of the flip sides to our weight loss drug success is what effects it will have on consumption. And as usual, people making incredible assumptions at the beginning of this when they don't really know, when they haven't got any data. If you were to go back 1.5 to 2 years and read what people were writing about weight loss drugs then, I promise you, and would bet a large sum of money, that the average problem that people put down there was that these were going to become lifestyle drugs, and people would continue their unhealthy lifestyle and take the drug to control their weight. That they would continue eating fast food and all these terrible things. Of course, that could only have been a proposition put forward by people who had no idea how the drug actually works. So the fact of the matter is it doesn't do that, and it suppresses your appetite. Yeah. And when you look at where it suppresses your appetite, I don't think we should leap to conclusions, but the area which looks most vulnerable is alcoholic drinks.
And I just add that we were very great fans of Sir Ivan Menzies, the late and beloved chief executive of Diageo. And when we used to ask him what the secret of running the business was, he said the only thing that really mattered was staying really close to the customer. And we are at a stage at the moment where the customer is changing. I mean, every generation drinks slightly differently, or in some cases not at all. And then we've also got things like working from home, where at the end of a day, people, or back in the day, even at lunchtime, people used to go down the pub. If you're working from home, that doesn't happen anymore. So we've got a situation where his wise words seem wiser than ever. And as Terry said, we've also got new management who don't have a huge background in the industry. So that's what makes it I think a challenging time.
Yeah.
I saw all the, when these weight loss sort of treatments were really taking off, you could see shares in companies like Coca-Cola and McDonald's falling. I presume the market's worried there that it was the sort of the junk food and fizzy drinks would be hit. But in terms of alcohol, I guess I hadn't seen that reflected in the market.
No, I don't think it's really cool on it. It's interesting. I don't think Coca-Cola has that much to fear. The CEO of Coca-Cola had quite a good answer on it. He said that whilst you might consume less as a result of taking the weight loss drugs, you're unlikely that you can't drink any less. I mean, human beings do need a certain level of hydration without which they expire, basically. And Coca-Cola, whilst obviously we know it for a carbonated drink with the high fructose corn syrup in it, they have also got Coke Zero, and they've got the other carbonated beverage, and they've got still beverages, and they've got tea, and they've got coffee, and they've even got some RTDs now. So he's basically was trying to put forward the view, which I think is partially true, that they've got a wide base covered in hydration. So I wouldn't be so worried about them as I would be worried about the drinks companies.
There's some interesting research. I think it comes from a US university. I think it's Virginia Tech. And what they did is they used AI to search Instagram, basically for mentions of evidence of drinking or not drinking. So, you know, sort of, obviously the obvious one is I started taking weight and I'm drinking less. But just if you search for, you know, people saying I got blitzed last night or I had too much to drink last night, and they found a significant reduction since weight loss drugs, these GLP-1s have actually been invented.